Welcome to YouTube channel Kadam Academy, dear friend. Also, I have my separate channel, Industrial Engineering and IoT. All the videos available. Subscribe the channel, both Kadam Academy, Industrial Engineering and IoT. Dear friend, this lecture is on the debit note and credit note. While studying the costing, and the engineering economics under this industrial engineering, you have to study the debit note and credit note. Dear friends, see, this is the seller who is selling this product, and this sells to the buyer or purchaser. When he sells a product of cost 6 lakh rupees to the buyer or purchaser, then if the total product of 6 lakh, out of this 5 lakh product is correct, there is no quality check, is perfect, but 1 lakh cost product is, he has said, return back to seller. So for this purpose, one document is required. For this purpose, debit note and credit notes are required, and that will be useful for the balance sheet, for the tax purpose, for the transaction purpose. All are included. This transaction by the seller to buyer, buyer to seller. These two notes are given, debit note and credit note. We'll see in detail how this debit note, credit note, and how the uses of this debit note and credit note. So debit note, credit note, from the buyer to purchaser, buyer to seller, debit note when goods are not as per the requirement. As we have seen in this last example, the 6 lakhs rupees cost good is given to this buyer. Out of this 5 lakh cost good is perfect, and remaining he has to return back to the seller. So friend, this debit note is generated when the goods are not as per the requirement, and also the credit note is there if seller undercharges or buyer purchase additional good. When this buyer purchase additional good, whatever the order given to the seller, according to this, or the undercharges, means this requirement, the cost applied for this seller is suppose 100 rupees, but by mistake he has given the cost of 90 rupees, means 10 rupees undercharge. So he has to give the credit note. But right now also you are confused. Seller to buyer, when condition seller to buyer, then he has to give credit note, buyer informed by of credit in account, or debit note, buyer undercharge. Like these conditions are there. We'll see in detail. So don't close this video. See up to the end to clear you very understanding purpose. The what is credit note? A credit note is nothing but a document, simple document prepared and issued by the seller to the buyer. Credit note is issued by the seller to buyer. What is the purpose? Correct an undercharge containing the details of the amount credited to the buyer's account and reasons for so, and it's known the credit note. So it is also known as credit memo or credit memorandum. So friends, it is a document is sent by the seller to buyer to correct an undercharge. So different conditions are there. When it is given, we'll see later on. But before that, it gives details why the party, one party is given to another party, why the party credited the amount of that credit. The credit note is a note sent by one party to another party, that is seller to buyer, and it becomes the party who sends, that is seller, party who sends the seller, and party to whom it is sent, that is buyer, and becomes a creditor, and he becomes a debtor, and he becomes a creditor. So friends, when credit note is sent, that question is arise in your mind. Now we'll see when it is sent. The credit note may be required due to calculation mistake. The purchaser when purchased the cost of rupees 6 lakh, but due to the less cost is calculation, during the calculation invoice prepared, the less cost, that is the or increased cost is applied in that invoice. That increase in this invoice value, or the problem with the goods supplied, there may be problem in the goods. Few goods are rejected and they are sent back to the seller. Buyer will send back to the seller. In that case, the credit note is sent. So this is the one condition. When credit note is sent, another condition. When the goods are returned, the credit note may be required due to the calculation mistake in the invoice already was studied. When the goods are supplied, but that good is returned back to the buyer. In that case also, the credit note is given by the seller to the buyer. The credit note, the another case is that the buyer sends, you can see here, the goods return is already studied. The buyer also sends it to the seller. Who is selling this product? That buyer, who can send to the seller. Then if the undercharge means whatever the costing he has to pay to the seller, and that is undercharge, means cost is reduced, and they are given the credit note to the seller. The buyer send it to the seller when he has been undercharged. The seller send it to the buyer when he has to overcharge also. Overcharges means the cost of product is 100 rupees and it is charged to the 100 rupees, 10 rupees extra. By mistake, the 10 rupees extra is charged. So that extra 10 rupees is overcharged to the buyer. So this seller account, he issue the credit note. The seller issue the credit note to the buyer. For he is responsible for this 10 rupees, and there is credit of this 10 rupees extra amount, and he has to give the another product or replacement of this against that extra amount. He has to give this new product in another transaction. Seller send it to buyer. This is the one case. The seller usually issues a credit memo for the same or the lower amount than the invoice, and then repays the money to the buyer and set it off against the balance due from the other transaction. This is clear to you. So credit note requires an acknowledgement from the receiver by a debit note, and the seller gets back the good sold by him to the buyer. The seller already sent the good of 6 lakh, but buyer has sent return the 1 lakh cost good return to the seller. So this supplier or seller gets back goods sold by him to the buyer. Then also credit note is issued. Correct? The credit note requires an acknowledgement from the receiver. And one more case is the buyer can also send credit note in case of seller undercharges. Buyer can also send to the seller the credit note. This is a case, the seller nothing but the sending a credit memo. Okay, it's a note require acknowledgement from the receiver of the debit note. This debit note will be given to the seller. Okay, so see, it gives the information to the buyer that the account is credited in the vendor's book. The seller give the credit note due to the less amount overcharge or the return of the whatever the product. In that case, the credit note given by the seller to the buyer. So this credit note is sent. When it is given sent, already we have studied. And lastly, it's nothing but the acknowledgement receiver by a debit note. When the seller gives the credit note, the buyer gives the debit note. The debit note given by the buyer against this credit note. Okay, this type of documentation is required. So friends, this issue of credit notes shows that the account payable are reduced, and in general it shows a negative amount. And friends, see here, the credit account give the more credited, and debit account is reduced. In the account, when we were to make entry, it is reduced and it is credited. And now friend, we'll go toward the actual what are the this is the format of this credit note. Okay, what it contains date, address, billing address, shipping address, to whom it is sent, the seller sent to the buyer, so address of the seller, address of the buyer, and the payments, the goods returned by the customer, amount of details, list of products, this amount and this list, details of the product, list of product, all the things are here written. This is the one example for your purpose. This like this, the debit note number and invoice number, name of this, shipping address, billing address, all the things are given with date and signature of the authority. So this is one of the form, one sample form for the credit note. So friends, credit note nothing but the original invoice against the original invoice. When it is provided by this, usually it refers to the original invoice, and in sometimes state as a reason for issue the reason. What are the reason for issue this credit note? That is also mentioned in that credit note. And this is received if the goods are incomplete or damaged. In that case also this credit note is sent. The customer may also receive one if they paid too much money, or it has been overcharged, or the incomplete or incorrect. Like this are the reasons already I studied. So friend, this is related to credit note. But when uses of this credit note, we will see the buyer to seller, buyer to this purchase, the item service. It's to allow the buyer to purchase an item or service from the seller. What is the use of this credit note? In future, the seller can take product from the buyer. So allow the buyer to purchase an item or service from that seller in future date. Or it is a form of the gift card, or you can say the store card. Store credit. Store credit will be, it is by using this credit note you can get it back. The credit note may be issued by the seller as a goodwill gesture to a buyer who wishes to return previously purchased merchandise instead of the cash repayment. In some circumstances where the original sales agreement, there is nothing given in that agreement or policy, refund policy, return policy is not mentioned. In that case, he has to mention and give the credit note and debit note. A credit note can correct an invoice that has already been processed and sent to the buyer. So credit note could be used in the case of the return goods for the accounting purpose. So friends, now we'll see the debit note. The debit note is nothing but it is a commercial document made and issued by the purchaser or buyer and delivered to the seller. Now in this case, see, buyer to the seller and giving details regarding the amount debited from the seller's account and reasons for this same is known as debit note. Also, it is also known as debit memo or debit memorandum. So friends, it is a commercial document issued by the buyer to seller as a means of the formally requesting credit note. Already credit note is given by this seller to the buyer. Now the debit note given by the buyer to the seller. So debit note is also known as the debit memo, already studied. But a seller might also issue a debit note instead of an invoice in order to adjust upward the amount and the whatever the previously amount is given to the upward amount of an invoice already issued, as if the invoice is recorded in wrong value. There may be case of wrong value. In that case also given by the debit note by the to the credit note. Okay, so friends, here debit note is a note sent by one party to another party. This is the first thing. I informing him that his account is debited in sender's book. In sender's book, account to the accounting, the sender's book is also important. So friend, the debit note contains detail as to why the party is debited and the amount of debit. By sending a debit note, the buyer reduces his liability toward the seller. So buyer reduces his liability toward the seller by sending this debit note. So friend, in this case, debit note, why it is, what are the different cases of debiting account are given as under. Here is the different case when debit note is sent. When the buyer returns the goods purchased by him, he has returned the 1 lakh cost good to the seller. Already we have seen in the example. There also delivers the debit note. He also give the debit note to the seller. So friend, on returning the goods, buyer sends a debit note to seller. The goods may be returned when they are defective, damaged, faulty, and not according to samples provided. There is a quality checks, and according to that they will send it back to the seller. So this is the one case when the buyer undercharges. Another case is what? The seller may send it to the buyer when the buyer is charged less. Buyer undercharges the seller account, then he issues debit note. The seller may send it to buyer when the buyer is charged less due to the problems in calculation or omission of the items. That means the not given defective products. Okay, due to defects in the product, he has given return. This is a different case. Okay, so friend, this is the case of the one of this case, and maybe overcharge. When buyer's account is overcharged, he sends a debit note to seller. Okay, he has overcharged to seller, so he has to give buyer is overcharged. Suppose cost is 100 rupees, but the seller has given 110 rupees. So that overcharged amount reduced by this debit note. Debit note is given by the buyer to the seller to reduce and give the credit note to us for this 10 rupees extra amount. So this is the example to clear you. Next is the document provides. This is the one of the document. Debit note is nothing but this debit note buyer to seller and credit note to seller to buyer. This is the document provides the information to the vendor or seller that debit has been made to his account in the buyer's book. That is important. And on this returning this, the buyer issue a debit note to the seller as an acknowledgement of the credit note. The seller gives the credit note and its acknowledgement is given by the debit note. Friend, this is the reasons. In general, debit note reduces the receivables. Whatever the receivables are reduced, and debit note serves as an intimation of the goods. This is format for the debit note. What it contains? See, again, like a credit note, the debit note number, the invoice number, the billing address, the seller's address, buyer's address, details of the quantity, the amount, and the authority signature and date, and like these details are all the invoice number, all the details are given on the there. This is the content of the debit note, so given by the buyer to seller. Now friends, what are the different uses of the debit note? When this is given, first case is what? Seller to the buyer when it is undercharged. Debit memo is a request is a sale document used to complaint processing to request a debit memo for customer if prices are calculated by the customer too low. For example, calculated with the wrong scale prices, you can create the undercharge by the seller. So in that case, debit note given by the seller to buyer also, because rate is undercharged. That's why the seller gives the to buyer a debit note. Okay. Next case, the seller price calculation is low, the same undercharge. The debit note prepared by the customer or buyer sent to the seller when the goods are returned in later. Already we have sent the example. The 6 lakh cost product is sold to the seller to the this buyer, and the buyer has given the 6 lakh rupees. Again, he has given the product. But what happened? Out of the 6 lakh, 1 lakh cost product is not as per the standards. So has good as his return back to the seller. In that case, he has to give the debit note. In this case also debit note. So friend, this debit note and credit notes are given to the seller to buyer, buyer to the seller. So these are the some examples, various examples. This will be helpful to you to clear the debit note and credit note. So friends, thank you for watching my video. If you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe my channel Kadam Academy and click on this like button.